Okay, so week two. We have read a lot of things this week, looked at a lot of things. Uh, our goal for this week was to think about our home foods, the ways we experience food as home, as a type of cultural experience, as a type of humanities experience, and then to think about how that experience of home broadens out into our cultural experiences in general. The idea is that, as students new to studying humanities, we may feel uncomfortable talking about great works of literature or fine works of art or beautiful operas, all the parts of art, the art world, and humanities that we see people talking about in very smart ways on our TVs or in our classrooms or in our textbooks. We may feel uncomfortable trying to come to terms with how do we talk about these things. Well, we all have cultural experiences. We all have experiences in the humanities, and this course is just asking you to pay attention to the fact that we have those experiences in the humanities. One of the things about those experiences in the humanities, because we all have them, is that we are all experts in encountering our culture. And this lecture is going to give us a way to think about how we encounter culture. We'll just start with you, or maybe me, and grandma's cake. Now, I should say right off the bat, I played a little bit with the word grandma this week and with our home cultures, and let's just admit right off the bat that not all of us had great grandmothers or grandmothers who were great. Not all of us had great home lives. Not all of us are comfortable thinking in terms of grandma or grandpa or mom or dad or home because sometimes those things are painful. I want to admit that right off the bat. I tend to romanticize my home life, my grandmother, and I tend to romanticize the experiences that I had as a child and as an adult when I recognize that not everybody has had those same experiences. And I'm really only using grandma or mom or home or dad or aunts and uncles as a way of thinking about how those first experiences we have with food set us up for understanding culture. My grandmother and granddaddy lived in Boaz, Alabama. My parents were from Sand Mountain in Alabama. I was born outside of Sand Mountain in Huntsville, Alabama. I cannot tell you how meaningful the experiences that I had going to my grandmother's house. Now, unlike many people, my grandmother did not live in the next street or in the same town. My grandmother lived a 10-hour, 12-hour drive away because we lived in the Detroit area and my grandmother lived in Alabama. And I'm only talking about one of my grandmothers because I didn't have a relationship with the other grandmother. That one, we were not able to have a relationship there. Grandmother loved to bake. She loved us coming home, and then because we were coming home for the summer, for a summer vacation or for a Christmas break, she would bake her little tail off. She would bake nonstop, and by the time we got to her dining room, through her front door, and all the hugs and the kisses and the bustling of bags and getting ourselves settled, and by the time we got to her dining room, we would see a table full of cakes. It's one of my fondest memories. I get choked up thinking about it because it was like this ideal place where not only would you get hugs and kisses and people loved you, um, but you would find cakes and pies. And my granddaddy loved buying Whitman chocolates in huge boxes. The cake you see here on the page on the right is not one of my grandmother's cakes, but it is based on her recipe, and it was made by my wife for me a couple Christmases ago. Unfortunately, she let me decorate it. which is why it looks like crap. But I can tell you, it tasted amazing. It was a peppermint cake, and it's one of my favorite memories from my grandmother. And to have my wife surprise me with this cake, it was a special moment. The ways we experience food in the home uh, can be expressed in multiple ways. You can hear a story like the one I just told, or like the ones that we read at the start of this week. You can read poems like the two that you see on your screen right now that we read. And I just want to mention these two. We had a couple of other really good poems, but these two are shorter and I can talk about them. And they are also by pretty famous and important American poets. So the first one, This Is Just to Say by William Carlos Williams, written in 1921. This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. Depending on your experience with poetry, you might read this and say, what? Why would you write a poem about eating somebody's plums? Or you might read this and say, wow, that really, I don't know how, but that poem captured something for me. It captures a sensuality of plums, sweet and cold. It captures a sense of connection where you steal somebody's plums. I will tell you a little bit of background on this poem. William Carlos Williams was a poet who was changing the ways that we write poetry. He was found kind of foundational in the ways of we think about poetry. And this poem was actually a poem that he wrote and put on his icebox for his wife to apologize for eating the plums. And frankly, if you're going to eat somebody's plums, writing a poem and making it clever might be a good way to do it. I like to think about the domestic negotiation here, where you eat somebody's food that they're saving, and then you apologize by writing a poem that then becomes one of the most famous poems in American poetry. The next poem, Separation Wall by Naomi Shihab Nye, written in 2019. Naomi Shihab Nye is a really famous Palestinian American poet, and she writes a lot about the Palestinian American experience. And now, having said that, you may have a different understanding of this poem as we read it out loud. Separation wall. When the milk is sour, it separates. The next time you stop speaking, ask yourself, why were you born? They say they are scared of us. The nuclear bomb is scared of the cucumber. When my mother asks me to slice cucumbers, I feel like a normal person with fantastic dilemmas. Do I make rounds or sticks? Shall I trim the seeds? I asked my grandmother if there was ever a time she felt like a normal person every day, not in danger. And she thinks for as long as it takes the sun to set and says, yes, I always feel like a normal person. They just don't see me as one. We would like the babies not to find out about the failures waiting for them. I would like them to believe that on the other side of the wall is a circus that just hasn't opened yet. Our friends learning how to juggle, to walk on tall poles. I love this poem for the way that it captures not only what we can hope for our children as they face a world that has walls that tries to separate people from the lands of their birth, but I also love this poem because of the ways that it talks about the relationship between mothers and daughters and grandmothers in a kitchen slicing up cucumbers. It's a poem that has a lot of substance, I think, both for remembering the effects of our foods at home, but how those foods, how that culture that we experience at home leads us out into the world and allows us to understand what's happening in that world. I don't know how you feel about poetry. I love poetry. I write poetry. I care about poetry. And I think it's a really powerful experience to learn how to read a poem and feel how we can speak to each other in ways that are different than our normal ways of speaking. I went right back. Sorry. I wanted to see my cake again. the experience of painting. You had to look at a number of images of paintings this week, of different images of paintings and foods, and there's some great ones in there. And I could have just done a whole slideshow on those, but I just want to point out a few. What I want you thinking about as you think about the experience of looking at these paintings is how the artists take their personal experiences of home and make those experiences meaningful for others, whether they are the thinking about the experience of labor in a kitchen in around the year 1800, the experience of living daily life within the one room of your home, in your study, in your kitchen, and then Norman Rockwell's Freedom from Want, where he paints this idealized picture of a Thanksgiving dinner. We have different experiences in our homes, different experiences in our kitchens, different experiences in the ways that we make food. But those experiences lead out into our culture because while we have our individual experiences, those experiences are meaningful for others when we think of them contextually. Say, when we think of slicing cucumbers with our grandmother, and we think about how um, that is such a real human experience, and yet there are people just on the other side of the wall who do not see your grandmother as being a real person. Even my grandmother, I can think about how, as a woman born in the 1920s or 30s, how she was barely seen as a person, even by her own country. She was just an old country girl who was expected to get married and have babies. Our experiences of the kitchen, of our family's food, can lead into meaningful expression, meaningful meaningful expression that can be read as part of the humanities. I'll say a couple of things here. The ultra realistic painting, the Pancake Cook, where we see the experience of the mother, the lady of the house looking onto the cook who's making pancakes. The experience of the daily life in the school studies painting of a very spare kitchen and study room, and then the experience of this idealized and frankly very white Thanksgiving. Norman Rockwell is obviously a very famous painter. He painted a lot of advertisements, a lot of magazine covers, and this is one of his most famous paintings. It is worth noting that this painting was not just this idealized moment, but it was trying to represent part of the speech from Franklin Roosevelt about the four freedoms that Americans have, and this was representing the freedom from want. Americans don't want. Of course, it's not entirely true. There's a whole lot of Americans that do want, and we can read a painting like this and ask, what part of the human experience is this painting missing? We also should think about, as we're thinking about what comes out of our kitchens and how do we experience home at food, we should think about the experience of story. Here's a few stories. I'll come to the one on the left in just a moment. Uh, Nadia's Time to Eat, or Nadia's Bakes, is a show on Netflix. This woman named Nadia came out of the Great British Bake Off, and she came out with a number of books and has been on come out with a couple of cooking shows. But she's really fascinating and really entertaining. If you have time, check it out. See what she's talking about. Her focus is largely on how do you cook food at home that is delicious and meaningful for your families. Sidney Poitier's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was a really groundbreaking film in the 60s that dared to tell the love story of a white woman and a black man. And it focuses on what do you do at the dinner table when suddenly you're faced with questioning all the values you had. The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, amazing book written in the 1980s about mothers and daughters, the mothers of who were Chinese immigrants to the United States, and the ways that the food traditions of the Chinese background get carried over to the United States through their daughters. And Mommy's Kitchen is a blog and there's many of these blogs where mothers post recipes, post ideas, post about cooking in the kitchen. Yeah, I guess it's worth mentioning right here and now. There's a gendered side of this that is pretty heavy this week in thinking about women in the kitchen, women owning the kitchen. We're going to talk about gender in food in a few weeks, gender in humanities in a few weeks. But it is always worth mentioning. Well, do women own the kitchen? Do women own the home kitchen? And is it necessary? Should we be cognizant of that as we're talking about the images that we're looking at? That said, let me talk about another one. So, ironically enough, this week would have been my dad's 80th birthday. He passed away a few years ago. My mother, who is still nagging on me. She, when she set up her Facebook page so long ago, she set it up with my dad's birthday as her birthday because my mother's a mother that a woman that was born in the 40s, and so she is still had some of the traditional values of like your husband's name and your husband's birthday as controlling who you were. She wouldn't appreciate me saying that way, but so she set up her Facebook page with my dad's birthday. So she got all these wishes of birthday wishes. One of whom was my aunt, who was my dad's sister, who asked if my mother was really 80 years old today. I just want to. What was odd to me was because we were talking about food and home, and this Facebook message came across my Facebook page this week. Are you really 80 years old today? I know another who would have been also my dad. Mom would have baked a big fat chocolate cake and used the same candles she had used for many birthdays before, and cooked all of someone's favorite foods. Birthdays were fun. Have a sweet memory or two on this special day. I replied, because my mom doesn't always check on Facebook. Hi, Aunt Margaret. I'm not sure when Mom will get on again, but her birthday is August. I think she used Dad's birthday when she set up her Facebook account so long ago. I'm thinking of Dad today, too. I can't believe he would have been 80 today. How does time go by so quickly? Thank you for making me think of grandmother and her cakes. I so often long for the days on Douglas Street when we were sitting around one of my grandmother's tables. It's easy to get sad missing my grandparents, my uncle, my dad, but now I mostly experience a deep gratitude for that time we had together. I hope you are doing okay too. My aunt then replied with a comment about canning and green beans, and I just I share this because those tellings of stories that we have that we used to have to sit around a dinner table to tell, or used to have to at the very least get on the phone to tell. We now tell almost daily on Facebook without even realizing it. We all have experiences of stories of our homes, good and bad, and positive and negative, and scary and fun and funny. We all have experiences of stories and foods, and those stories help us understand a little bit about how culture gets experienced. This is a good point to talk about a basic humanities concept, and that is how our cultural awareness expands. So we start with ourselves up here in the upper left-hand corner. That is our primary experience, what you can sense, what you smell, think, taste, hear, see, what you experience as a person. That's your primary experience. That's your primary culture. Some people never get past that. Very few, but some people never get past just thinking about themselves within their daily sensual experience. We move from that individual self into a family, and we experience culture through family. And think about how rich and deep the culture that you've experienced through your family is. How you experience an ethnicity, religious values, a belief about politics, a belief about art or reading, a belief about TV, a belief about economics. We have lots of cultural experiences through our family. Now, we really don't always think about those as cultural experiences. We think of them as just being our annoying Aunt Judy, or the way our dad is grumpy. But they are types of cultural experiences when we can step back and look at them. We expand from our family or from our lovers, um, those people that are the closest to in the world, to our friends. We might have close friends, and those close friends might intersect with different spheres of friends. Say friends from college, friends from work, friends from our past, or from our neighborhood, or from our church, friends that we had in high school, friends from social media. We have these different spheres of friends, and some of them interact, some of them don't. But these friends all provide us with different cultural awarenesses. Think about a group of friends that you can joke about dating or um, men or women with, or friends that you have that you can joke that you can talk about movies with, or friends that you can have that you can talk about this humanities class with. And those may be very different groups of friends. And each of those groups provides us with a cultural awareness that is a little bit different than what we experience in other places in our life, and maybe a little bit broader than what we experience through family, which is broader than what we can experience through ourselves. We also have a cultural awareness through just our locality, where we are, in our case, in Metro Detroit, in Dearborn, in the surrounding areas of Detroit, or in Detroit itself. We have a cultural awareness here, a local awareness that is different than many other people's culture. In fact, it's not so unusual to say to hear somebody talking about Detroit culture, or being from Detroit, as being something different than from a different place in the country. And certainly that cultural awareness, that cultural history, comes with it with an awful lot of cultural context and humanities production, Motown, hip hop, uh, um, the auto industry, labor unions. We have an awful lot of rich cultural history that grows out of Detroit and the Detroit metro area. We also have our regional culture, what it means to come from Michigan, what it means to be able to, when somebody asks you where you live, you show them your hand. There is a lot of regional culture that we grow a deeper awareness of the world around us. And I'll go through the next couple more quickly. We have a national culture and a national cultural awareness that adds more complexity to who we are, or more complexity to our ability to understand who we are. And then, of course, a global awareness, a sense of our, that we are not alone on this planet, and this entire planet has its own cultural awareness. What the reason why I point these things out is because as you think about your personal experiences that you've had with food, or your family experiences you've had with food, or your friends, or your regional experiences, your local experiences, your regional experience, your national experience, your global experience, what you have to think about is how we represent those experiences in different forms of story, poetry, painting, art, film, and think about how those different awarenesses affect meanings. I told you about my grandmother's peppermint cake. Here's a photo of my grandmother with my niece and nephew in 2010. My nephew is now a 22-year-old kid. My niece is, or no, I guess my nephew is 21 and my niece is 18. They're big kids now. My grandmother is sadly no longer with us, and I miss her very much. The experience of my grandmother, the experience that I had eating her peppermint cake and being very excited to go in and see her big table of cakes, and frankly being excited to give her a big hug. That experience affected me when I saw the movie Coco for the first time in 2017. Now, we are not a Latinx family. I don't. That's not part of my cultural tradition. But the cultural tradition of having a grandmother and a mother, a cultural tradition of having foods that were foisted upon us because my grandmother loved us, or foisted upon us because that's what we did together. That the movie was pretty profound for me to watch it and think about my grandmother, who I've lost. Vinnie Andrews painted Grandmother's Dinner, and it's a particularly African American experience or painting there, expressing something about eating dinner with your grandmother. Um, and but at the same time, there's a human experience in looking at that painting. I think a lot of times when we think of race, and we're going to talk about race as well as we move out forward. A lot of times when we think about race, we think, okay, can a white man understand a black man's painting, or can a white man understand a Latinx or Mexicano film? And uh, I think one way we can come to terms with our racial difference and who can claim what or who can understand what is not that I try to say that I understand what it's like to be a black man in America, or that I understand what it's like to have an experience with a Mexican grandmother, but that I can say I have an experience with my grandmother in the kitchen. And when I can understand what my love and appreciation of my grandmother, because I have that, I have a greater understanding of just our common humanity. I may not understand everything, all the cultural relevance of Benny Andrews' painting or the movie Coco or other experiences, but I certainly understand loving one's grandmother and missing her. I want you to keep a couple things in mind. One thing to keep in mind here is this idea of expanding cultural awareness. That's a key humanities idea. This moving from the self to the family to the local to the regional to the national and global, and how our understanding of art, our understanding of meaning in the world has to go through those expansions in order to get a more complex understanding of each other. So, what with that, one of the key things I want you thinking about this week is how culture moves from the personal, from yourself and your grandmother, in the way you taste your grandmother's cake, to your grandmother's kitchen and your family. How you move from the personal to the global, and how culture moves from the personal to the global. One of the things that to also point out here is that we experience the humanities from the inside to the outside. So again, there's this expanse. When you first read This Is Just to Say, or when you first read, or when you first looked at the painting, the Potato Eaters by Vincent van Gogh, you had an internal experience of that gets expanded once that experience gets compared to how other people experience it on the outside. Here's something else, though. We participate in art as we move from the self to the others. You had an experience this week of participating in art. And perhaps you didn't create the art, but you certainly recreated it in your own individual experience, and as you tried to make connections to the painters and the writers and the storytellers that you looked at this week. You have participated in art. And from here, of course, you can go and create your own art, thinking about your own experiences and how you would relate those to others through a story, through a poem, through a painting, through a song, through a sculpture, through an interpretive dance, whatever form of the humanities that might take. You have the power of creating because you have the power of experiencing. Grandma is just the start of our experience of culture and the humanities. It's a good start, but it's just the start. There's a whole world out there for us to experience. I'll talk to you next week.